yes, and then start to think, oh my God, what did it do? Why? And women start to, well, I don't know if I'm the right person for this. There are many people who are much smarter than I am. Oh, I don't know. It's so competitive. And stuff like that. So be less humble and show your muscles. We need you gals. So, what will I be discussing? Basically, well, it has been, I sort of thought that might happen, but it has been discussed, of course, when you talk about science communication. Often the first step is to convince the scientists that it's important to communicate, so I'll do that very briefly because it has been done. How do I think you should communicate? A bit about metaphors, the pitfalls and why they're useful. Some clash of the cultures. There are basically three actors in science communication. The scientists, the journalists such as me, and the PR department. And all three have sort of slightly different role. So it's important to know what everybody wants so that we all can get along and sing Kumbaya and stuff like that. So, some do's and don'ts for when you are on TV, that was asked specifically. Often I get questions, well, what about nuance? But it has been explained very good with the Yippee metaphor, which I thought was epic. So we already discussed some of the things, and if you think we should do other stuff, then what do? You raise your hand. Excellent. Okay, and it's like a small bit of media training. Yeah, that's it. Does that sound okay? Yes. Yep. Wonderful. Well, why? Many things have been discussed. The taxpayers' money. That's a very good argument. The problem is many scientists find it very annoying that they have to explain, sort of talk it okay that they're doing their job. So that's always a bit difficult argument, but I think it's very true. The other thing is when your research is part of a societal debate and people think it's important, politicians tend to give more money to that. So that can help your future work and your future grant application. So it's always good, even if you're just a selfish person, just do it for yourself then, and maybe you'll get more money out of it later on. An argument I haven't heard yet is the scientists of the future just inspire young people to pick up science as well. Because science is interesting and fun and very necessary, and it's more embedded in our daily lives than ever. I mean, you all have a sort of hyper-modern smartphone in your pocket. If you're pretty much the same as I constantly use social media and that device. So it's really intertwined into our lives, but nobody really understands how you make one of those. Did anybody ever make a smartphone from scratch? I doubt it. So the generation of my father, for instance, he builds small radios. Children were doing that back then because it was possible to make a radio. Because you just had to coil a wire and some few resistors and a diode, and then ta-da, you're done. But nowadays, that's not really possible with the current technology. When my car breaks down, I was actually with somebody in a car that broke down, and somebody from the AAA in Holland, de Wegenwacht, came up and he said, well, where do you need to stick in my laptop? That's pretty much the problem with cars these days, and it used to be sort of a simple process. So technology is more complicated than ever, and at the same time it's more in our lives than ever. And the problem with that is, I assume that you are doing your job to make the lives of people better. If not, please go away. So whenever you ask a fundamental question, or you're doing some applied science, you're trying to make the lives of people better. But because it's so complicated, there is a huge societal debate going on with these topics, especially now, which has been discussed before. And so, if you want to make the lives of people better, you have to help them incorporate it in their lives. There are many discussions. Nuclear energy has been mentioned, genetic engineering, nanotechnology, which was my field. I studied physics, by the way. I have my master's degree in solid-state physics. I forgot to mention that, right? All right. So I was a physicist. And so nanotechnology is really scary because it's small and we can't see it. And we'll probably all die like asbestos. Those are feelings and ideas that are there now. And it has some dangers. I mean, the biggest problem with communicating about the mad cow disease was when you say nothing can happen, that's pretty much a guaranteed basis for problems. Another great example, for instance, is the cervical cancer vaccine, the HPV vaccination, which didn't go too well. You know what I'm talking about, right? Yeah. And I saw I saw it in a leaflet from RIVM, the Dutch Institute for Public Health and Environment, I would say. And the leaflet said there are no side effects to this medicine. And I was sort of shocked, because there will always be side effects. Whenever you do something to a body, there can happen something. Otherwise, it doesn't work. It's homeopathy. Sorry, okay, that's a cheap shot. But I think in this audience it's okay. No, but you understand where I'm coming from, right? That will bite you in the end. It's okay, and especially you guys have some ethical qualities. I mean, I as a physicist, when I talk about physics, I mean, I work with dead particles. Nobody cares if I torture an electron. There's no societal debate about that. And the thing is, you always have to be aware of what you know and what you don't know. And probably that is one of the first really important rules of media training. Before you get into an interview, decide what you're willing to tell. What is your message? And stick to that. And if you are asked something that you don't know, say that you don't know, and how long it will take to find out. Or who does know. Or when you will know. When the big fire at Moerdijk was a big chemical factory fire, there were experts, and they were saying, well, judging on previous things, previous explosions, we don't think that there's much of a problem. Okay, tell that to the person who is looking outside the window, seeing her child play in the playground, licking the slide, because children tend to lick things, and at the background you see a huge cloud coming towards her child. You have to be very careful when you get into those discussions, when you get into ethical discussions. Be very honest to what you know and just tell them what to do in the meantime until you find out what you need to know. I hope you'll never get into that nasty place where you have to do that on national television, because that job sucks. But it's interesting things to think about, and I tend to bounce up and down a little bit through the presentation, and hopefully it all makes sense at the end. One important thing which has been mentioned a bit is the changing world. It used to be a mayor and a priest in a village telling you what to do, and you did it, and you went back to your 50s job. But now times have changed. You get your information everywhere, and the problem is we think we have access to much information. The problem is the more information you are able to retrieve, the more it gets filtered to what you want to hear. When I type something into Google, and you type something into Google on your PC, our results will be different. It is made for you. I get my information via my Twitter feed, much of my information, because I have scientific journalists there. I have, when I wrote a lot about Fukushima, I had some Spanish dude living in Japan who was a nuclear scientist. So that was very useful information, but I get my information filtered, because I choose the people who give me the information. So it's very important to know that people nowadays, normal people, not like you, but normal people, who are exposed to all kinds of information, and people can just write anything. And that's okay, that's the wonderful thing about the internet. But that comes back to the obligation that you mentioned. I think it is very important for you guys to participate in those societal debates. Not to scream the loudest, but to have that whisper of sense and science back into the debate. And not get the BMR vaccine problem with Andrew Wakefield. I don't know if you know this, but there was a horrible, horrible scientist who did some horrible research and said that you could get autism from the BMR vaccine, which children get. And now in England, children are very, very ill because less people get their children vaccinated because of this BMR scare. So it's very important that you participate in that. And this is a nice example. Again, this is the Dutch Association for, critical, no, it's not critical. It's a skeptical inoculation, I would say. And they have a wonderful website. You should really look at it. They sort of tear apart what the Dutch Institute for National Health says, and they put it side by side what the truth is and what they say. And it's mind-blowing how good they are at sort of convincing you that the vaccines are a problem and that nobody knows what they're doing. It's the same thing as the balance. You were sitting there, but I think that was you, right? With the balance of global warming? That was you. Oh, you switched seats. So it's pretty much the same thing. Just show them that there is good research and that there's bad research, and that we, as scientists, have sort of tools to determine what good and bad research is. That is the scientific literacy that we all have to work on to get people to have. Sorry, the sentence ended in a train wreck, but we need to increase the scientific literacy, basically. So is that clear? Are we in agreement? Yeah. I would say so, right? Does anybody say, well, I really don't care? That's okay. I once spent an hour on this because there was one PhD student who just didn't thought it was important. So no, if you want to spend an hour, no. Okay. So then, how do you go about this? Well, we just saw a presentation, a wonderful presentation on how you can make a story. And I just was a physicist. I had no journalistic training, and so I had a very patient editor who helped me. Thank the heavens above, because I sucked at it. Yeah, and I still sort of suck at it, I think. But it's getting better. And that's after just 2 years of constant writing. And you can always get better, right? I mean, that's really the thing. I spent 7 years doing physics, trying to learn the math and stuff like that. I mean, it takes practice. It really, that's just the thing. Just do it. Just do it, like you said. Okay, so, this is Albert Einstein's general theory of relativity. This explains it all for physicists. Does it explain it for you? No. No disrespect, but you probably didn't have this kind of mathematics, because nobody has unless you study general relativity. And the thing is, it's so simple, the basic rule of communication. You have somebody who talks and somebody who listens. And please remember this. This is the most important thing. This is the most important thing. I cannot change how you listen, but I can change how I talk. And that sounds so simple, but it's the most important thing for successful communication in anywhere, even between you and your professor. I mean, he has certain goals, certain expectations. He comes from a place. So if you want to convince him or tell him something, you have to communicate in their world. If I talk to you, I will try to use medical metaphors, for instance. That's the simple basic thing. If I use physics metaphors, for instance, then it will not hit you. So Science communication is like pulling a caravan. When you stand 20 feet away and you shout towards the caravan, come here, you can shout as hard as you want, but the caravan will never come to you. You have to go there, connect, and then you can pull it everywhere. It's a very simple metaphor, but to achieve this in every article that you make, that is something only the best writers can do. You have to think about your audience, you have to think about what you want to convey, and try to get inside their heads. And that is the basic of the story. And the jargon we discussed. When walking after across the beam, be careful of the boom. If it's not made fast with the lanyard, the southern guide may throw you overboard and into the outboard. You will end up mushed and flotsam, or even frozen derelict like Leonardo DiCaprio in Titanic. This is basically a very simple sentence of how to sail and not make a mistake, or you will fall overboard. Flintoff is on strike and Ponting is set an attacking field with two short legs, a silly point and a man out on the pool at the deep third man. Does anybody know which sport this is? Cricket. Excellent. The thing is the sentence sort of correct because I know nothing of cricket and I tried to make a very complicated cricket sentence. But I never had the opportunity to ask a cricket person.
Absolutely correct.
Okay. The thing is, these are things which normal people do as well. You have jargon everywhere. Your carpenter has jargon. If you ask your plumber what to do, or your car mechanic, they all have jargon. So it's not, it's good to have jargon. It's easy. We know what we're talking about. But you have to be very aware of the words which are difficult. So when you write down a text, try to mark for yourself anywhere where you use the difficult word, or word you haven't explained, or a word that doesn't come up in the normal vocabulary, and try to think of a synonym. And we'll get to that later. When I try to explain science, for instance on TV, for a general audience, I usually have two metaphors to have the idea of what I'm doing. For instance, when I talk about Isaac Newton, you've heard of Isaac Newton? He was a very famous 17th century physicist, one of the most famous physicists, and he was sitting underneath an apple tree. And at a certain point, and this story is probably not accurate, it was first thought up by Voltaire, but bear with me because the story is nice. So he sat underneath an apple tree and he got an apple in his hand. So you and me would probably swear, walk away, kick the tree maybe, and be annoyed. But not Newton. Newton was a very smart guy, and he was thinking of a very strange experiment. He was thinking, what if the tree were twice as high? Well, probably the same thing would happen. He would have more of a headache, but the same thing would happen. He maybe have to put on a helmet, but the same thing would happen. And then he asked himself a very, very strange question. What if the tree was 380,000 kilometers high? A very strange question. He thought, well, probably the same thing would happen. The force, that strange force which he could not understand or not explain, which he called gravity, would pull that apple towards the earth. And then he thought, well, what if that force which pulled the apple down towards the earth is the same force which pulls the moon around the earth? And for the first time in human history, there was somebody who was thinking, what if the forces and the powers below also account for the phenomena up there? And then he was the first person to say, if that is the case, then I can think of an experiment which could verify this. Because I can use the calculus I just discovered to calculate how long the moon would take to circle the earth once. And he got the big Newton calculator, and he calculated it with elliptical integrals, which, please don't go there. And he calculated it, and it appeared to be about 29 days. And we already knew this, because that was the month. That is how long the moon takes to circle the earth once. So from a simple story like this, and I sort of do the thing with the way I talk, and it's sort of exciting, you get the concept of how the gravity laws were discovered by Newton. And I didn't use any math. I can explain all these things in words. And you guys can do this as well without using the difficult techniques or the process. The process is not the most important thing here. It's the end result which makes it more and more exciting. And I used an anecdote, which was mentioned before. I will get to that later. But I'll mention one thing first. What you guys need are PhDs. Which sort of makes sense considering the audience. But I mean with that personal human drama. And that will make you feel the first time maybe like the used car salesman that you saw in the presentation before. But it is very important because if I have a PhD biologist, for instance, who, let's say, walks up and down for 4 years on a Spanish mountain to find some sort of grub or an insect, then I will start my TV story or my written story with the guy and the satchel walking 10 miles up in the morning, and then sun goes like that, and then he does his insect thing and he walks back. That is gripping. That is interesting. That is sort of the connection you make with your caravan, and then you can pull the audience away. Why does somebody put 4 years of their life, work incredibly hard to discover something? Why? That is something you can use, and that was something I wanted to add to the anecdote story, because it's so important. And if you want to write something, and you interviewed your professor, for instance, use quotes. So then you get blah 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 blah, and then blah 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 blah. It changes your rhythm, it changes your tempo, and that's nice to read. It makes it sort of lively. It's the music in your text. And the music in your text, that is something you can only learn by doing it year after year after year. Or, if you're brilliant, in a day. And the Eiffel Tower is again another metaphor. I love to sit in France, and I regularly skipped my high school to get the train and go to France together with a friend of mine. And we just sit underneath the Eiffel Tower and eat some brie with a baguette, and we would sit next to Centre Pompidou and stuff like that, and we couldn't speak a word of French. I am a physicist, I don't do languages. So I couldn't speak a word of French, but I could still enjoy France. If I really want to understand France, where the people are coming from, where they're going, the culture, then I need to speak the French language. The same thing goes for science and, for instance, tools like math, statistics, and stuff like that. The process again. You can enjoy and get science, only the last few percent of really getting it, then you need art training. But that's not the goal of your writing. Your writing is never there to make them a scientist, right? If you want to write something in a popular thing, do you think they will end up as a scientist? Again, audience participation moment? No. No. So that's not your goal. You're not writing a textbook. You're writing something to be enjoyed. Something to say, oh, I didn't know this. That is what you want, right? Sorry, I did catch a little bit of a cold, so if some sort of horrible noises somewhere in my cavities get conveyed through the audio thing, then I'm sorry. So if I don't, and you know why. Okay. Metaphors. There's always a lot of debate about metaphors because they tend to be, they have downsides. They're not always 100% accurate, duh, because they're a metaphor. But I sometimes get feedback back from the more fundamentalist scientists who think you should be very careful with metaphors. And there is a lot to be said for that. But you have to decide for yourself how far you want to go. But they're fun. They make the story more funny, like in books. This is, we mentioned this book before. This is from The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, the ultimate nerd book. And we accidentally discussed it just before, which is a real surprise. So, but the ships hung in the sky in much the same way that bricks don't. I think this is a wonderful metaphor. I saw her sitting at the bar. I approached, hello, she said in a voice so husky it could pull a dog sled. It was as tall as a 6'3" tree. And the politician was gone, but unnoticed, like the period after the doctor on the Dr. Pepper can. They're not all as successful as metaphors, but they make it more entertaining. And this is also something which is a good thing to have if somebody says, well, I read your article. I thought it was nice. That's okay, right? And this is what I say to physicists, because many physicists are opposed to metaphors, and then you have to talk in their language. This is a mathematical model of electrons, which is from the beginning of the 20th century, maybe end of 19th. And the thing is, every scientific model makes assumptions, and it sort of ignores things. This, for instance, the top one says electrons are very tiny and they don't interact at all. They only fight big atoms, which is fairly accurate. Well, I hope I can see a tweet from you later on, which is fairly accurate, but no, it fails at some point. For instance, it cannot explain things like superconductivity or whatever. There are all kinds of physical things that it cannot explain. But still, it's a useful model. Metaphors are exactly the same. If you use a metaphor, it cannot explain everything, but that's not the purpose of the metaphor. But you have to be very clear on what it does and does not describe. Often people ask me why I'm at the TV to explain something which is not even my field. And I will get into an example just after this. And if somebody else can do it better, then by all means. The thing is, if I know 50% of a topic and I can convey 50% of that, then I'm still doing it better than when you convey 10% of all your knowledge. So please keep that in mind. Make a choice. Don't make it to ground coffee, the bad, horrible kind. I was in Wereld, which is a daily TV program in Holland, which is being viewed by about 1 million to 1.5 million viewers. And there was a test which said that they could predict how old you would get. And it worked with telomeres. So they wanted me to explain what it does. And what the basis of the story is, and probably you'll notice, so I hope that I'm not saying something stupid. Like I love it. Okay. The DNA strands, every time your cells multiply, then your DNA gets copied, but it doesn't copy all the way to the exact end of the strand. I believe the 3 strand, that's always where it gets wrong. So it misses a tiny bit of information. So your DNA gets shorter and shorter and shorter at each division. So, it's correct, right, so far? Yeah. Okay, so I tried to explain this sort of in an intuitive way, and I said, well, you know what your DNA is? Your DNA is a very big book, and I've got a book with me there, and that book says everything about how you look like, what you look like, and how you work and stuff like that. So all your genetic information is in that book. But the problem is when you go to the library and you copy your big book because you want to multiply your cells, then you miss some information at the middle of your book, at the end of the sentences. No, because the book curls up. You ever had that experience copying a big book? I mean, come on, medicals. Right? Okay.
That's not correct. The telomeres are a piece that doesn't contain information.
Yes, but I wasn't finished with my metaphor yet. So, because you miss information, you cannot read all the way to the end. So imagine if you want to prevent this, you add, at the end of each sentence, you would add blah, 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 blah. That information you would miss every time you copy your book, but that's okay. Who cares? Blah, blah, blah. It's just nonsense information. So, the telomeres are the blah, 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 blah. The telomerase is the pen that adds the blah, 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 blah. And so I could explain from there. And so everybody had a vivid image that they could work with and understand what the meaning was of the words. And I said what the problem was with telomeres and stuff like that. But if I were to start with this, then normal people would be lost. We tend to use the word normal and abnormal, but we do that with a little wink, you understand, right? You're not abnormal, but, well, you know what I mean, come on. Okay. Another metaphor? One more? Okay. hope that the media thing will work. Yeah. So, you may be wondering what this is. This is an H&M in France, where they have designer dresses, which the H&M is a large clothing chain, does regularly. They invite big, famous, well-known couturiers, and they sell those dresses for maybe 50 euros or something. So, when the French shop opened, and I'm sorry, they're mainly women, so later on when I describe the metaphor, I will be using the word woman a few times, but it's not sexism, just look at the video. I wouldn't be caught dead there. If I were, I would be. So this goes on and on and on. Okay, shush, you're creeping me out. Okay, so the reason I'm showing you this is I was teaching a girl, age 14. She was failing her physics, so I was asked to help her with her physics. And she was just one chunk of teenage annoyance and estrogen and just... And everything sucked. Especially physics, which really sucked. And she didn't want to. And it was, so I was trying to explain Ohm's law about current resistance and voltage. She was just sitting there. And I was just watching that pile of despair. And I saw a tiny blue, if you know the H&M chain, you know the blue label tags that stick out with the size of your clothing. And I saw this, and I said to her, well, you know that large clothing sale that they have where the big couturiers design a dress like Victor and Rolf and I know. And they sell it for very cheap. Huh? You know this, right? Yeah, I know. Okay. So imagine that in the morning the shop manager walks with the newly designed dress, puts it in the window, and puts its price tag there for 20 euros. And in front of the shop there's a huge square. And that huge square has thousands and thousands of women. And they see the price tag. And they're... And that's sort of a Dutch word pun. Spanning is excitement. They get really excited, which is also the same thing named for voltage. So they get really excited, and they're trembling with excitement, and they just barge in. And a huge stream of women, a huge current of women starts to go into the shop. But then the security guard thinks, whoa, these girls are crushing each other like you see in the video, so we should sort of add some resistance. We close the doors a little bit. So the current of women, the stream of women, gets sort of slightly decreased. But then a colleague of the shop owner didn't really get the memo, and he thought, we need to sell more. So he lowered the price from 20 euros to 10 euros. So those women go crazy. They just, the excitement, the spawning goes through the roof. And the current even gets larger and larger again because they push each other in and in and in. So I asked her, okay, please write down what we know. So the price goes down, the excitement goes up, and then the current goes up. Okay, when you add the resistance, more resistant means with the same excitement or current, the current goes down, and they said all these things. And I said, well, listen, you have all these rules. The ancient Greeks invented something awesome which can combine all these things. It's called the multiplication. It's incredible. If you write down U equals I times R, they have all these things. Look, this goes up, this goes up. And she sort of understood. And actually she had a good grade. And the thing was, this was, I think, a nice example of communicating in the world of that person. And you don't need to make it as as jumpy and dramatic as I just did, because it's just, I like to do this kind of stuff. So anybody can do this, but the basic fact is, think about your audience. Think about their world. What do they know? What do they think is interesting? And then try to translate your story to that. And make a nice anecdote, a nice story, and that will help. And I would guess that you probably not forget quickly this metaphor, right? That's something to hold on to, because it's already embedded in what you know. You have sort of a coat hanger where you can hang up the information. And so the information stays and sticks longer. So when you want to communicate, you will end up with a clash of the cultures from time to time. It can happen. We have on one hand the big ass scientists, on the other hand we have the awesome journalists. And there are certain things that both parties are looking for. The scientists are trained for accuracy. You cannot speculate. You cannot just think, well, it could be this or that. Are you certain it could be this or that? Right? That's what you've been trained for. The devil is in the details. I did my 1.5 year research for my master's thesis, which went on a bit longer due to all kinds of things. And it was for me a graph which went like this. And if I were to find that it didn't go like this, but went like that, then I would get a publication. The thing is, I was so focused on that detail that made my research awesome or not. The thing is, first, if I were to explain this to you, first I need to explain what this entire graph means before I can get to my details or to my own research. And that's from time to time, 90 to 95% of your story is about what is already there. Right? Does that make sense? Is it still interesting? I see you yawning. You still think it's interesting or not? But it doesn't apply to you? Or do you have questions? No, it's after you, behind you. No? It's okay? Okay, if you have any question, I'm here for you guys, so just please. Pure respect. I made a TV thing about a chemist, and he had a process with 20 neat, nifty steps with all kinds of liquids and stuff like that, which I could perfectly explain. But when we got to him, he had a sort of grey humming machine called the Chemmeister 2000, I don't know, and he put his material in there, pressed the button, 20 minutes of humming later, and he got an end result. And I said, well, that's awesome, wonderful, but I want to see the old-fashioned hands-on steps, because I can explain this. He said, no, I don't want to, because I don't want my colleagues to think I'm still using the old method. Okay, I would hope that your colleagues will judge your scientific merit on the things you publish in peer-reviewed journals. When you go on TV, when you explain something in popular science magazines, of course you shouldn't say complete bull something, but please, your scientific merit should be judged on your journalistic things, and if people don't do this, then too bad for them. So don't be too hung up, oh, I don't know what my colleagues will say, maybe I'll say something stupid, maybe I'll forget something, oh, come on. I mean, many of the scientists are happy that you have the guts to come out and explain something to a lay audience. Please keep that in mind. So why communicate? Many of the times, sometimes scientists still wonder this, but we discuss this. Well, we want something newsworthy. It doesn't even have to be new to be news. I went to the Wereld to explain what happened in Fukushima. I explained how a tsunami works. That is something that has been known for many, many decades. and then later how a nuclear reactor works. You know, if you can have your research, there was a wonderful example. What was it? It was the large flood in America, in New York. That was a large flood, right? A couple of months ago. Sorry?
Superstorm Sandy.
Sandy, thank you very much. And there was a Dutch researcher who did research on sort of similar things. And the VU in Amsterdam put on their website that we have somebody who's working on that. And a day later I saw him in a TV program explaining things. So you can use news, and that might sound awfully nasty to do this on, well, yeah, how would you say this, to sort of abuse this news fact, but it doesn't have to be so. If you are explaining what happens, then you can help people understand what is going on. So that is a trick. Many journalists are looking for newsworthiness. And from time to time you really don't understand, I don't understand, for instance, with the Wereld, what they find newsworthy. So many of the times I prepared a story, and I prepared about 50 stories, and I've been there 12 times. So many of the times you just get bumped because another thing happened, and it can be anything. Yes?
Do they ask you, or do you then go to them if you have an idea? How does it go?
It varies. Both things can happen, but it always happens on the day itself. So I would get a phone call at around 11 o'clock, yesterday actually. Got a phone call about 11 o'clock because of the Kepler satellite, which looks for exoplanets. It malfunctioned because one of these flywheels, the second flywheel broke down. And they asked me if that was news or not. And then I prepared the story, explained them how we could go about this, what Matthijs could have, what Matthijs could question me about, what would be interesting, what he could say, what we could do, what kind of experiment we could do, and stuff like that. And if you watched yesterday, then you saw that I wasn't there. Because, 6 actors were talking about in which famous series they would love to play. It came more cynical across than I really meant to. I mean, that's their choice. I mean, it's their program. If I were to sit there every day, even I wouldn't watch. You know, I mean, it gets tiresome. So it's the mix of that program that makes it interesting. The point I'm trying to convey is you don't always know what newsworthiness is, but the PR department can help you with that. We're looking for perspective. Okay, so you discovered a new drug. What does it mean? Can I buy it tomorrow? Is every disease or illness now solved? Yes?
I actually have a question about the last part you were talking about.
Yes.
I heard a lot of people in my department who got a story on television, well, not PhDs, but professors, and then they said, but they cut stuff out and the story is not what they said anymore.
Yes.
How do you handle this? If it's your own research, you want it to be conveyed correctly, and if they cut stuff out which is important for you, well, it may make you seem stupid or not doing your work right, or and I think that's really
Scary.
It makes well, people lose their trust in science, but I think this is something that's really smart in it.
That can happen as well. So your question is, if you if a TV crew comes by you and makes a small item about your work, then they go to the edit room and they may cut out certain stuff which is vital for your story.
Yeah.
Okay. Which program was it, by the way?
I don't know.
Okay.
I'm really sorry. It has happened a few times, and it always comes up in the coffee break with us. So it's something I picked up.
Yes, it's a very good question. Well, one of the things you can always look for a live program that really solves the problem. But yeah, you can try. I think that the most important thing, but this can also happen to a written story, which has been said before. That journalists might not let you even view the article. When I did interviews, I always let the person view what I've written and the end result. But I always said to them, you can only make adjustments on things which are really factual inaccurate. Because all the other things belong to me. And of course I haven't seen this item and I don't know what was cut, so it's very difficult to speak on this in general. I think the most important thing is the first step is that you get a call from an editor. An editor, and I've been an editor, what I do is I look for an interesting story and I try to phone up the person involved. And when it comes to hospitals, I first have to go via the PR department, and then they find somebody for me. But we discussed, and I tell them what I want to do and what I'm interested in, and what the point is we want to that come across. And at that point, that is the point where you say, okay, well, if you want my help, then I will do everything for you, but it is very important for me that this and this have to remain. In the end, it is a matter of trust. And at the end, you can always debate on how vital it is. If there are really factual inaccuracies, then please write them afterwards, saying this is not what we discussed. And you can, even if you're a bit eerie, you can have an email sort of thing, well, we want to discuss this. Sometimes I give scientists the script in advance, who really want to. The problem is, sometimes scientists are trying to memorize it. And then you get a story like this,